What if I told you a married woman had sex with the same man almost every single day for 9 years in her own house, while her husband was home working just downstairs, and he never once found out because the man she was sleeping with was living in the attic directly above their bedroom the entire time? Then one night, her husband ends up dead on his own living room floor, and the man in the attic is the one who shot him. This is the true story of Walburga Dolly Oesterreich, later nicknamed the Queen of Los Angeles, and Otto Sanhuber, later nicknamed the Batman of Los Angeles. One of the strangest, longest-running secret arrangements in American true crime history, and it starts nearly a decade before that gunshot, in a completely different city. Dolly is 33, married to Fred, and living comfortably in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where Fred runs a successful apron and textile factory. The marriage is dead in every way that matters. Fred works constantly, drinks heavily, and by Dolly's own account, isn't giving her what she wants in bed either. So she's already sleeping around, timing her hookups around Fred's long hours at the mill. One autumn day, her sewing machine breaks. Fred sends a repairman over from the factory, a 17-year-old named Otto Sanhuber. Dolly answers the door in nothing but a silk robe and stockings, clearly not planning on getting the sewing machine fixed that day. She seduces him on the spot. What starts as a one-time hookup with a teenager turns into a full affair that stretches on for the next 2 decades. At first, they just have sex the ordinary way, hotel rooms, his boarding house, but hotel bills add up, and Dolly starts worrying Fred will notice the money disappearing. So she comes up with something considerably less ordinary. Otto simply moves into the attic of her and Fred's house, permanently, in secret. He quits his job entirely and takes up residence in the crawl space directly above the family that has no idea he's there. Coming down each morning once Fred leaves for work to sleep with Dolly and spend the day with her, then climbing back up before Fred gets home in the evening, where he passes the hours reading and, once he can afford the noise, teaching himself to write pulp fiction on a typewriter. Fred occasionally notices things: a strange creak from the attic, food disappearing faster than it should. Every time, Dolly has an excuse ready, usually blaming his drinking or exhaustion for imagining things. It's a flimsy excuse, and somehow, for years, it just works. In 1918, 5 years into this arrangement, Fred and Dolly decide to relocate to Los Angeles. Dolly has exactly one condition for their new home: it needs an attic. She quietly sends Otto ahead of them so he can already be settled into the new house's attic before she and Fred even arrive to move in. The whole bizarre routine simply continues, uninterrupted. In a new city, 4 more years pass, and one night Fred and Dolly get into a violent argument, the kind where Otto, up in the attic listening, genuinely thinks Fred's about to beat her. He grabs 2 .25 caliber pistols from the bedroom bureau, the same bedroom where he'd been having sex with Fred's wife for years, and comes down the attic ladder for the first time either of them has ever done in front of Fred. Fred, understandably, has no idea who this stranger is in his own house, and lunges at him. In the struggle, Otto shoots him 3 times. Fred doesn't survive it. With the gunshots still echoing, Dolly and Otto scramble to stage the scene. Otto grabs the cash in the room, along with Fred's diamond watch to make it look like a robbery, locks Dolly in the closet from the outside, and climbs straight back up into the attic before police, summoned by a neighbor, ever arrive. It works. Investigators have no framework for imagining a man has been secretly living in the house for 9 years, so the case reads as an unsolved burglary gone wrong and eventually goes cold. Here's the detail almost nobody includes when this story gets told. Otto didn't leave after the murder. He didn't need to hide from Fred anymore. Fred was dead. And yet, he simply stayed in that attic for 8 more years, still living the exact same secret existence. The only real change being that Dolly finally let him have a typewriter, since there was no longer anyone downstairs whose suspicion the noise might raise. Dolly, meanwhile, wastes no time finding more men to sleep with, specifically her own attorney, Herman Shapiro, and a businessman named Roy Klum, both while a man she'd been having an affair with for 9 years and who just killed her husband was still living directly above her bedroom. And it's through these 2 new relationships that she starts making the mistakes that eventually undo the entire decade-long secret. First, she gives Fred's diamond watch, the one supposedly stolen by the burglars, to Shapiro as a gift. He recognizes it immediately. Dolly waves it off, claiming she'd found it later under a cushion, and simply never mentioned it to police. Separately, she asks Roy Klum to quietly get rid of one of the guns used the night of the murder, worried it might eventually connect back to her. Klum throws it into the La Brea tar pits. She convinces a neighbor to bury the second gun under a rosebush in his own yard. In 1923, a detective connects Shapiro to the watch, and around the same time, Klum, after a bitter breakup with Dolly, tells police about the gun he dumped in the tar pits. Officers recover it. Dolly is arrested for the first time, but without being able to explain how she could have possibly locked herself inside a closet from the outside, prosecutors don't have enough, and she's released. The charge is dropped for lack of evidence. While she's briefly in custody during all this, Dolly asks Shapiro to do her a favor, bring groceries to her vagabond half-brother, who she says is staying up in the attic. Shapiro goes, and what he finds waiting for him is a thin, pale man who hasn't had a real conversation with anyone outside Dolly in years, and who, finally given the opportunity to talk to another human being, tells him everything. The whole affair. The decade in the attic, the murder, all of it. Shapiro, for reasons of his own, doesn't go to police right away. He tells Otto to get out of the house and leave town, and instead of exposing Dolly, he becomes her next live-in boyfriend himself once she's released. That arrangement lasts around 7 years. Then, in 1930, Shapiro and Dolly finally break up, and bitter about it, by most accounts, he goes straight to the police and tells them everything Otto had confessed to him years earlier. Dolly is arrested again. Investigators track Otto down as well. He'd fled under a new identity and eventually resurfaced. Dolly's trial ends in a hung jury, with most jurors reportedly already leaning toward acquittal. And in 1936, the remaining charges against her are formally dropped for good. She's never convicted of anything connected to her husband's murder. Otto's outcome is stranger still. He's actually found guilty of the killing, but by the time the case finally reached trial, the statute of limitations on the charge had already expired. He walks out of the courtroom a free man for a murder a jury had just convicted him of committing. Otto changed his name first to Otto Weir, then to Walter Klein, moved up to Canada, got a job as a porter, got married, and eventually made his way back to Los Angeles quietly, where he just disappears from the record completely after that. Nobody knows what happened to him after. Dolly, on the other hand, stayed in Los Angeles for good. She lived another 30 years after all of it, and in 1961, at 80 years old, she actually got married again to a man named Ray Burt Hedrick, who'd been her companion for a long time. Less than 2 weeks after the wedding, she died. A free woman, right up to the very end, having spent nearly a decade of her life sleeping with a man hidden in her own ceiling, and never once having to answer for what happened the night he finally climbed down. If stories like this, the ones so strange you'd assume no one would actually believe them if they weren't true, keep pulling you in, subscribe, because there's always another one.